Hi, my name is Maria Lloyd. I'm the author of a book titled Words Are Wealth, and I'm the owner of a marketing firm named Opens Clicks Cash. And today I'm going to do something a little different. I'm not going to talk about business much at all. Actually, this is a very personal video. I'm going to talk about my dating life in Paris, France. Now, for those of you who may not be aware, I do split my time between the United States and Paris, France. Paris is home for me. It's my favorite city in the world. Tied at number two would be Chicago, Illinois, and Cape Town, South Africa. So again, today I'm going to switch it up a little bit. But before I get into that, I want to ask a quick favor of you, please. Like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to this channel. I am on a personal mission to help as many business owners as quickly as possible reach their first six figures in business. So if that mission resonates with you, then please subscribe to this channel and make sure you hit that notification bell so that you can be notified when I upload videos. Again, I will occasionally sprinkle some personal videos such as this one, but most of the content you will find is related to making money in business, right? Getting to that first six figures in business. So you may notice I'm wearing one of my favorite t-shirts today, actually, from Paris with love. It's an amazing brand named French Abroad. Shout out to Christian. That's the Cameroonian brother who started this clothing brand, and it is high quality. I highly recommend it. Again, shout out to him. He's super cool out there in Paris. And so in wearing this shirt, which I always get compliments for, I was like, you know what? I want to record a video that addresses a very common question that I receive, and that is, how is the dating life in Paris? Okay, so I'm going to talk about that today. I actually have some notes, so if you see me looking off to the side, it's just because I'm going to reference my notes so I can make sure I don't leave out anything. Now, before I get into my experience dating in Paris, France, I just want to preface this conversation with the following. I have seen a number of videos of women who are sharing their experience of dating abroad, falling in love abroad, and all of those sorts of things. And it's inevitable that there are some men in the comments who, for some reason, feel obligated to humble women. And they may say things like, oh, well, that guy doesn't really like you. He's just interested in a green card. And so, to that end, I just want to share that if you feel compelled to try to humble me as a result of the information I'm sharing in this video, don't. The reason why I'm saying that is because, one, I think it's important for Americans to understand that not everyone has an interest in getting an American passport, okay? America is not the promised land for everyone. And I have found this to be especially true in France. A lot of the people who are in France are genuinely very happy with staying in France. You don't really hear a lot of folks trying to cross the border illegally or otherwise, to get over to the United States from France. And I think that could be said for a lot of European countries, quite frankly. They're living a pretty good life. I mean, I know that everyone has their own metric of happiness, if you will, wherever you live, but I would consider, safety. If we're talking about safety, I would definitely have to say that France is a very safe country relative to the United States. If we're talking about the quality of life in terms of health in particular, I would say that the French are definitely excelling as it relates to healthcare and being able to give their citizens and even foreigners like me access to quality healthcare and medications without basically running them into bankruptcy. And if we're talking about just overall quality of life, right? Being able to exercise without necessarily, feeling like you're exercising, or being able to get an education without being driven into a crazy debt, or eating food that isn't poisonous and literally killing you and giving you cancer. Again, France excels in that category. So that's the first thing. I just want to remind any Americans that are watching this content that, America is not the promised land for everybody on the planet. There are, in fact, a lot of people who are genuinely happy to be where they are, and it's not in the US. And so that's the first thing. So as I share the stories of my personal experience dating in Paris, France, I just want to let you all know that in some instances, you may hear that some of the men that I've talked to or dated, they actually lived in the United States for a period of time. They have no interest in living there again or no interest in visiting at all. So there's that. The next thing is, I believe that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right? And so sometimes on the internet, you get these, get your thug fingers typing and you're saying things like, oh, well, you're not even that attractive, or, you must be running into, deadbeat men or whatever the case may be. And again, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I'm 100% okay with the fact that not every single man on the planet finds me attractive. And like, vice versa, right? I don't find every man attractive. And so just keep that in mind before you make any remarks about my appearance or anything. Just know that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And so there is really no need for you to share your opinion about how I look and why you think I have met the men I met or whatever. So with that being said, the first thing I want to do now that we've gotten that out of the way is kind of explain who I am and what I'm attracted to. I think that's important because this is my experience, right? It's not to say that, if you are a Black American woman and you're watching this video and you plan on visiting Paris, France, I have no idea if you're going to have the same experience, right? You may have a totally different experience. So let me just kind of explain who I am, right? So I am a Black American woman, was born and raised in America, and I'm a millennial. So I am a Black American millennial woman who is attracted to men. Now, I will say in terms of the race of men, I have only been in relationships with Black men, right? However, I am an equal opportunist. I'm open to dating other races of men. However, at this juncture, I have not actually dated any men outside of the African diaspora. Okay. So there is that. Now, in terms of where to meet men in Paris, France, personally, for me, I have found that I've met most men when I'm on the train, actually on the metro. I will just be, either going into the metro or leaving the metro and a gentleman approaches me. Another, place, if you will, that I've met men is just literally walking on the street, which is very common. You walk most places when you're in Paris. In fact, you actually want to walk because the city is so beautiful. And a man will approach me and, we'll engage in conversation and yeah, and we'll exchange contact information. So for me, commuting by train, again, which is something that people do all day, every day in Paris, it's very rare that you find someone who's driving places. In fact, it's a bit more inconvenient sometimes to drive somewhere. I have met the men that I'm going to share information about on the train. So that's my experience. I have met other Black American women who have lived in Paris or visited Paris over an extended period of time, and they have shared that they felt invisible while they were there. They did not attract anyone. Men did not approach them. So again, I'm not sure. Maybe it's an aura thing. I have no idea, but I have found that I've met most men just literally minding my business and being out and about. So that's in terms of where to meet men, I would just say just living your life, commuting by train, which everyone does anyway, going to the grocery store, walking to an event, whatever, like they're everywhere. So many prospects in Paris. So yeah, prospective dating. So, as a sidebar, I just want to say I have a friend who teases me all the time because as an entrepreneur, I oftentimes use terminology that we use in business when I'm discussing my dating life. So that's why I said prospects. In this case, I mean prospective mates for, dating. So anyway, I'm trying to break out of my business mode in this conversation. So the next thing I have here is I'm looking at my notes, going on dates with men. So when I stayed in Paris last year, I met a gentleman. I was walking to an event, and this gentleman actually spoke to me in English. He approached me and engaged me in conversation in English. And I was a bit flabbergasted because at that point, every man that had approached me speaking French. And I did not speak French as well as I do now at that time. So a lot has changed since last year because when I first got over there last year, I was very nervous. my French, I was not very confident in my ability to speak the language. And so this gentleman approached me speaking English, perfect English at that. It wasn't broken. And I was really shocked. So I asked him, like, hey, how did you know to speak English to me? And so he explained that, he just kind of looked at me and felt that I was American. So I was like, wow, that's crazy. Well, come to find out, he had actually spent a lot of time in America and had actually been married to an American woman. So makes perfect sense. I would say that this gentleman was very, very kind. We went on dates together. We spent a lot of time together. I would say for me, culturally, what I've found that is, distinctly difference between dating Black American men in the United States versus dating Francophone African men in Paris is that the speed at which the man is interested in making the relationship official is very quick. I know people that are dating Black American men and they have known each other for, over a year. They've been dating for over a year. I mean, they almost practically live together. And the guy is still stalling and still saying, oh, we're just getting to know each other. I'm not interested in a relationship, although they are doing things that people would normally do in a committed relationship. But this guy has no interest in being in a committed relationship, although he is portraying the same behaviors as someone who's in a committed relationship. My experience dating Francophone African men is totally different. Really, by the second date or so, there's already kind of like this I don't want to say demand because that sounds pretty aggressive. But there is this expectation that you're in a committed relationship. And so you will also, you may even hear the guy refer to you as ma femme, which is, my woman basically in French, and like that you're, his significant other. And so that was very interesting for me because I have not been accustomed to men moving so quickly. Again, in my mind, this is quick, right? I had not been accustomed to that. And so it was actually a bit refreshing because I will say, as a Black American who was born and raised in America, I find that the relationships between, or the culture of relationships for Black Americans can be a bit toxic. If you think about some of the music that we listen to, especially as we talk about hip hop and R&B, for example, there really isn't a lot of love in that music. It's more transactional, right? I bought the girl a Birkin bag, I flew her to my hotel room, I smashed and sent the beat home. Like, it's a very aggressive, very hostile, anti-love sort of narrative that we are being pushed over and over and over again. Shout out to Afro Beats for switching it up for a change. I'm so thankful for that. Because our music, our culture surrounding relationships and marriage and dating, in my opinion, is very toxic and dangerous. And so, yeah, it was very interesting for me to be in the presence of men who were actively and very vocal actually about being in a committed relationship pretty early on. There was not a lot of time for playing. They really want to, advance. And what are their reasons? We could probably go on. This video could probably last for days talking about the reasons in which these men have a tendency to want to move a little quicker. One thing that I was told by someone who was born and raised in Paris is that the cost of living is expensive in Paris. So oftentimes these men see this as an opportunity for dual income, which I think, is smart so long as everyone's being honest with each other. I get it. And then other times I've heard that, there is a deep and profound desire for marriage and children, especially within, the Francophone African communities. There's a lot of pressure for the men to have a wife, have the children, because there's a certain level of maturity that is assumed when a man takes on those responsibilities. So there is that, they're pretty eager to find that wife, to have those children, because they want to be revered as a man within their culture. So those are just a couple of, theories or explanations for the rush to commit to a relationship or a marriage even. But yeah, I would say that that was very interesting for me. That is still interesting for me, even as I again balance, these totally different cultures, the United States and France. So I'm looking at my notes again. So I do want to talk about going on dates. One very popular topic in the United States in particular as it relates to dating is like who pays, right? Should the woman pay for her own meal on the first date? Should the guy pay for both of their meals? And then if he pays, how much should he pay? Should he pay $500 on the first date? Should he pay $40 on the first date? And I'll be honest, I find these conversations very juvenile. I am not the kind of person that really, I don't really care as much about who's going to pay, how much is he paying? Because one thing I've noticed just from my personal experience in dating, whether it's abroad or in the United States, is that there is a certain level of ownership that people tend to feel that they have over you when they pay for something. And the more money they spend, the higher the expectations, right? And so I tend to lean on the side of, hey, I don't mind paying for my own. In fact, I would suggest I pay for my own meal. You pay for your own meal, especially on the first couple of dates. We're just trying to get to know each other. There's a mutual interest in seeking to know one another, get to know one another, right? So this notion that the man always has to pay, and like if the woman is okay with him uh not paying from time to time, she's weak or something like that, I think again is very juvenile, very silly. The reality is, as adults, it is very expensive to live as an adult. Okay, expenses have gone up, the cost of living has gone up across the world at this point. So I don't think it's fair to place that burden of financial responsibility, if you will, during the dating phase solely on the man. I think it's kind of silly. So I just want to let you all know that's my perspective on it. If you disagree, I would love to hear your point of view on it and why you disagree with, where I stand with it. So, with that being said, I will say that I found Francophone African men to be extremely proud about paying for things. There have been times with the gentlemen that I have met and dated that I have had to insist with a great deal of passion to allow me to pay. I remember one time I really was craving pineapples for some reason. And so this gentleman and I were walking, just kind of, we didn't really have a destination in mind. We were just enjoying each other's company, engaging in conversation. We were just walking. And we approached the grocery store and I was like, oh my gosh, I want pineapples. Like I've got to, get some pineapples. So I went into the store, I bought some pineapples. I also bought some, I think I bought like a soda or something like that. It was, just little stuff. And I asked him if he wanted anything. And I think he wanted something. No, I don't think he got anything. Um, and so when we got to the checkout, he started to pull out his wallet. And I'm like, no, this is me. Like, I'm the one who wants this stuff. This is all my stuff. I'm literally going to like run upstairs and put it in the refrigerator. So no, like, don't worry about it. And so I have found that Francophone African men, they do want to pay for things. There was another gentleman I went on a date with. This was not really a date. We were just hanging out. So hanging out with him, I had asked him to show me around the city. And he took me to like a shopping mall, which I was so impressed. I didn't know that Paris has like proper shopping malls like we do in the United States. And that mall was packed. Okay. So we're at the shopping mall and we're in Lacoste. And if you know anything about Lacoste, it's, I don't know if that would be considered a luxury brand, but it's pretty expensive. And he's looking for some shoes. And he looked at me and he said, "Do you want anything? You know, if you want anything, pick it out." And I'm like, "Oh, well, I mean, that's so generous of you. Thank you so much. But no, I'm not interested in, getting anything. But again, thank you." So it was just the fact that like he put it out there, like, look, if you want anything, pick it out. I'm paying for it. And so I just thought that was really, really like very considerate, actually. Um, I've even had situations during a date where the gentleman pulled out his check. So not like a paper check, but on his phone, like actually showed me how much money he earned. And we talked about that. I mean, and what was interesting, it wasn't like this, because that's another thing I've noticed in the United States in particular. We have all these conversations about, should the woman earn more? How much should the man earn? Is he less of a man if he makes less than the woman? All of these sort of things. And so in this particular context, this wasn't really like a judgment call. In fact, we were just talking about his job, and he was explaining to me why he was leaving the current job to go to another job. And he was showing me his paycheck as an example. And I was like, wow, that is so, in my mind, I was thinking, wow, that is so like cool and transparent of him to share his earnings with me. Like that's not common in the United States. And so I really appreciated that. So dating overall, I would say, Paris, they say is a city of love. Paris has a lot of different names, the city of lights. It really is a beautiful place to explore and like enjoy sightseeing. I mean, you really don't even have to go on a proper date. Simply walking around Paris, France is a date in and of itself, to be honest. It's absolutely gorgeous. And I found that dating in general, dating Francophone African men in Paris, yeah, they do want to pay for your meals. They're very romantic, very gentlemanlike. I mean, honestly, I don't really have any negative things to say as it relates to like going on dates with men. So that's my take on that. Next thing is I wanted to talk about just my, because obviously being, American, I have quite a bit of experience dating Anglophone men, or, men that speak English, where like they come from English speaking countries. And now I have, some experience dating Francophone men. These are men who come from primarily French speaking countries. And so there's often the question of which one is better. I don't really want to get into that sort of compare and contrasting. I think that's it can come off a bit controversial, which I am not one to run from controversy, by the way. But that's not a conversation I'm necessarily invested in enough to want to kind of, yeah, I just don't want to step into that one. But here's what I will say. Okay. So from my experience so far, I've already shared that one of the biggest differences is that, the Francophone African men that I, have dated, am dating in Paris, tend to be more serious about moving forward with a serious or a monogamous commitment. That can be good or bad based on where you are in your life. So, for example, um, two of the men that I dated when I was in Paris this, previous time this year, they expressed interest in having children and a wife. The wife first and then children after. Well, I am not interested in marriage anytime soon, if at all. And children, I'm absolutely not interested in having children, especially not at this juncture of my life where I'm like moving around between countries. I have grand plans. I don't see it. So with one of the gentlemen, actually with both, I shared with them, like, honestly, we don't have the same goals. We don't have the same interests, like long term and short term. So I don't think makes sense. It's not going to work. One of the gentlemen asked me outright, is it okay if I have you as my wife here in France and a wife in another country, an African country that I won't name? And so I was like, well, I'll be honest. First of all, thank you for thank you for asking me. But no, I'm not interested in that. And I'm not interested in that only because I've found how difficult it is to maintain a marriage with one spouse. I can't imagine the drama and the confusion and yeah, the things I don't want to be bothered with now if there's another spouse to have to manage. So we had that conversation and he asked me outright, he said, well, I think it's only fair because you don't want children and I want children. So I should have a wife in my home country, a Francophone African country, and me and you can be together here in France. And I was like, again, that's a great point, right? Great point. It's just not something that I'm interested in at this point in my life. But again, I appreciate you for bringing this to the table for my consideration. And perhaps, I may change my mind, I may not. But at this point, I will say that it's not something I'm interested in. So we actually are still, we're cool. There's no issue. We converse and he knows where I stand with things. And he's been, expressing interest in kind of changing his approach to how we could make something work in terms of a, committed monogamous relationship. But I know deep down what he really wants. And so unless his behavior shows otherwise, I'm just going to assume that he wants that. And there's nothing wrong with it. I'm not judging it at all. I know plenty of people that are in polygamous relationships. So no judgment on this part. It's just not something that I'm interested in at this juncture of my life. There's another gentleman that, again, same thing, wants marriage, wants children, has a certain number of children in mind that he wants. And I, shared the same thing with him. I'm not interested in either of those things at this point. And so we stopped talking. And for some people, that may come off as like, whoa, okay, what an a-hole. But honestly, I really respect him for that. I think, yeah, I mean, it's obvious that our interests and our goals in the short term and the long term are not aligned. So instead of wasting my time and him wasting his time, he thinks enough of himself to not do that. And I respect that. I have found that it is so peculiar and I found this with my experience dating Anglophone men in particular, Anglophone African, Black American, whatever men. We will share our goals and interests with one another. And instead of acknowledging, hey, there's some friction here, I'm noticing that you want A, I want B, and these things are not negotiable. We probably shouldn't date or talk or do any of those things. I will find oftentimes that the Anglophone man just goes with the flow. And same thing with the Anglophone woman. Like, let's keep it real, right? It takes two to tango, sometimes more than two, I guess. And so I just think that is such a waste of time. It's such a waste of time unless you all are willing to change the dynamic of your conversations and your relationship from one of a romantic interest to one of a friendship. It doesn't really make sense to me. And so I really respect him for, acknowledging, okay, well, we don't want the same thing, so we don't need to talk. And again, there's no beef. Like, I can message him now, I can call him now, it's no problem. But it's just we don't have the same interest. Another thing that, is a bit different, and I know that I've shared this previously, but another thing that's a bit different from my experience dating Francophone African men versus, Black American men or even Anglophone African men is that there seems to be a sentiment of appreciation for relationships. There isn't like this shame around being in love with a woman. Like I've noticed, especially in Black American culture as it relates to hip hop or rap music and R&B music, there's almost like a shame surrounding falling in love with a woman. Like you're weak if you fall in love with a woman. or if you fall in love, period, right? And that is totally opposite in Francophone African communities from my observation and experience. It's a noble thing to fall in love. Now, does that guarantee or mean that, these men are going to be guaranteed to be providers of their household, or that they are faithful, or that they're not physically or emotionally abusive? Of course, there are no guarantees, right? We're talking about human beings. There's a lot of variables that goes into what makes or influences the behavior of a human being. So no, there are no guarantees. Um, but culturally, there is a huge difference. I mean, it's not even close in terms of the fundamental appreciation for falling in love. There's no shame around it. It's celebrated and it's acknowledged. Whereas I have personally found that within Black American culture in particular, it's really not celebrated and it's kind of shamed. And it's like, yeah, you're kind of deemed weak if you fall in love with a woman. Oh, and don't let her be imperfect. Like, don't let her cheat. Don't let her, spend up all you all's money. Don't let the woman be imperfect. That will just further affirm how weak you are of a man as a Black American to fall in love in the first place, which again is just really a ridiculous and toxic narrative because there is no perfect person. So it's very strange, but overall, I would have to say, one more thing, or a few more things. Another thing I will say is that I feel, in terms of my experience, I do feel that, like, the boldness of men, because here's the thing, like, I met men from all walks of life, right? Men from Morocco who, they're African by origin, but I don't know if I would consider them to be like Black, although some of them do identify with the Black race. So that's an interesting conversation, really. Um, I met white men, white Francophone men, European white men. So I've met men or engage with men abroad across the spectrum, right? And so one thing I will say, I've never gone on a date with any man outside of the African diaspora. That's never happened to date. But I will say, like, in terms of the men, like, being attracted to a Black woman, that was very prevalent, whether in Paris or my time in Geneva, Switzerland. I mean, it's very prevalent. It's not like odd or awkward. I found that the men across the board do have an attraction to Black women. I don't know if that is just the case for Black American women or if it's the case for Black women in general, but I will say that I found there is some attraction um, towards Black women from men across the board. So I know that's a little bit off topic, but I just remembered that experiencing some of that. But actually, it's not off topic because what I was going to say is the biggest difference between men outside of the African diaspora and those within, whether we're talking about Francophone Africans, Anglophone Africans, or Black Americans, is that I do find that men within the African diaspora are more open to approaching a woman versus men that are outside of the diaspora, which is a very interesting observation. I just think that maybe the way that Francophone white men and for example, approach women is just totally different from the way that, African men or that men from the African diaspora approach women. So that's one big difference I noticed. Whether we're talking about a Black American or an Anglophone African, I do find that these men are more, I guess, bold in their approach when they're approaching women. Yeah. So that's another thing I noticed. Um, Let me look at my notes just to make sure I haven't missed anything. Yeah. So, I mean, honestly, this is again my experience, a Black American millennial woman, splitting her time between Paris, France, and the United States. And I will share this out of all the men that I have met and dated, when I'm spending my time in Paris, all of them are French speaking and just, they speak within their own, they speak their own tribal languages. There would be times where the communication was a bit off between me and some of the gentlemen, especially those that don't speak English. And again, most of them do not speak English, the ones that I have met. So the communication will be off, but of course, I know how to ask for help in French. I know how to communicate to them that I need you to speak slowly. I need you to repeat yourself. So, we would work through those challenges. But yeah, I will say, honestly, in order for you to have like a really rich experience in your dating life, you do need to speak French. So, or at least understand it. So there's that. So with that being said, I had promised I was going to make this video many months ago on some of my social media pages, and I just never got around to it. But yeah, here we are. So that is my personal experience dating Francophone African men, and just kind of comparing the experience between that and dating in the United States, in particular, Black American men. And again, I just want to say, this is not one of those videos that's intended to kind of pit these two cultures against one another. I hope that I didn't do that. I want to just say, if it appears that was my intent, it was not my intent. I'm literally just sharing my experience, right? My experience, my observation. It doesn't mean that any culture is better than the other. It just means that for me, there are certain things that I like and appreciate or have observed in one culture over another. So this is not to pit these, different cultures against each other. Each culture has its positives, each has its negatives, and that is to be discerned by the person who is experiencing those cultures. So again, my intent was not to pit these men against one another. I tend to believe that if you date one man, you've dated them all. So um, yeah, overall, I just, my experience, I would say that there isn't one that's better than the other. It's just in some regards, there are some differences. And contingent upon where you are in your life and what you're seeking and what you're interested in, you have to decide if this culture works for you or if that culture works for you. That's a personal decision. So thank you. If you have watched this content, I just want to say thank you so much for tuning in. Again, don't forget to like this video, leave your comments. Have you dated abroad? Have you dated Francophone African men? I want to hear your experience. What's your experience like dating Black American men if you have? I would love to hear your experience, and maybe just men in general. It doesn't have to be, someone within the African diaspora, but I do want to hear your experiences. If you have any additional questions about my experience, drop that in the chat, or in the comments rather below. And yeah, make sure you have subscribed to this channel. Again, I won't always do personal content like this, but I occasionally will. And so I would appreciate if you go ahead and subscribe to the channel, and make sure that you hit that notification bell so that you can be notified when I upload new content. So that's my personal experience about dating in Paris, France. And yeah, always remember, content is currency and words are wealth. All right, signing out.